Smile, Valerie. The world is finally seeing the real you. My front door was completely shattered off its hinges at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. 2 police officers stormed into my quiet living room, aggressively shouting about estate fraud and shoving my arms violently behind my back. I did not scream. I did not ask why my parents were already standing in my driveway, dressed in their absolute best, smirking like they were attending a royal coronation. I did not ask why my influencer sister, Bryn, had her expensive phone perfectly angled to catch the harsh glare of the streetlights bouncing off my metal cuffs. The live stream counter on her screen was spinning completely out of control. 800,000. 1.5 million. 2 million strangers were actively watching me get dragged across my front lawn in my thin pajamas. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her hot coffee to cleverly hide her delighted laugh. My father leaned his heavy frame into the glowing camera frame and sneered, "Some people finally get exactly what they deserve." Bryn shoved the glowing screen aggressively into my face, absolutely desperate for me to break down and cry for her audience. I looked straight into the camera lens and stayed completely silent. They were entirely convinced they had trapped me. They had absolutely no idea they were live streaming their own funeral. Thank you for watching the video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Valerie, and I am 35 years old. For my entire life, I was the designated scapegoat of my family. My father, Warren, was a wealthy former wealth advisor who ruled our grand household like an absolute king, expecting everyone to bow to his every demand. My mother, Lorraine, managed a prestigious local charity fund and hid her profound, calculating cruelty behind a flawless mask of perfect Southern hospitality. And my older sister, Bryn, was their undisputed golden child. Bryn built a massive, lucrative online empire by exploiting every minor family drama and cleverly packaging it as radical honesty for her millions of gullible followers. Everything she did was heavily curated, aggressively monetized, and entirely fake. I chose a completely different path. I became a forensic accountant. I spent my long days quietly tracing missing funds in elder trust accounts, stubbornly standing up for vulnerable people who could not defend themselves against financial predators. My parents constantly mocked my career, loudly calling it boring, pathetic, and entirely useless. They demanded blind loyalty, but they only ever offered conditional love. I spent years desperately trying to earn a single word of genuine praise from my mother. I would sit at their lavish dinner parties, quietly enduring their passive-aggressive insults, hoping that one day they would look at me and finally see my worth. Everything absolutely shattered exactly 1 year ago when my beloved grandmother Beatrice passed away. She left behind a vast, lucrative estate worth over $11 million. Grandmother Beatrice was a sharp, fiercely independent woman who saw completely through my parents' elaborate facades. Her original will was completely fair, splitting the liquid cash evenly between my father, my sister, and me, while leaving her sprawling historic home and the surrounding wooded land to an independent charitable foundation. My family despised this generous arrangement. They firmly believed every single penny of that empire belonged to them. Just 3 days after her somber funeral, our family attorney, Harrison, summoned us to his lavish downtown office. With an utterly arrogant smirk, he produced a brand new, recently restated will. This heavily altered document gave my father total control of all the massive assets, handed the beautiful historic home directly to Bryn, and threw a pathetic $30,000 at me on the strict condition that I sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. My mother sat gracefully in the corner leather chair, delicately dabbing fake tears from her eyes, playing the perfectly grieving daughter-in-law. I did not sign. I looked incredibly closely at the signature page. Grandmother Beatrice suffered from severe Parkinson's disease, and her real signature always had a distinct, heavy, trembling pressure on the final stroke. The ink on Harrison's document was perfectly smooth and incredibly fluid. It was an absolute forgery. When I calmly refused to sign away my rights, their pleasant mask completely slipped. My father angrily threatened to destroy my professional reputation. My mother coldly told me my sheer greed was breaking her fragile, grieving heart. Bryn immediately took to the internet, aggressively posting tearful, highly edited videos about a toxic, unnamed family member who was viciously trying to steal her rightful inheritance. The public harassment was immense. They wanted me utterly isolated and completely terrified. They truly thought I was weak. They did not know they had just baited a trap for a predator. I did not argue with them. I went quietly to work. I pulled the dense property records and the complex bank statements. As a forensic accountant, I know that numbers always tell the absolute truth, even when people lie. Within weeks, I discovered a massive, staggering secret hidden in the endless rows of data. 2 months before my grandmother died, while she was heavily medicated in hospice care, an $850,000 mortgage was mysteriously taken out against her pristine property. The massive sum of money was funneled directly into an obscure shell company named Cypress Point Holdings. From there, the funds were completely drained. They were systematically used to pay off my parents' massive, hidden tax debts, purchase luxury vehicles for Bryn, and lavishly fund her shiny new production studio. But the most utterly terrifying part was the official ownership document for the fraudulent shell company. They had illegally used a stolen copy of my personal driver's license to completely register Cypress Point Holdings in my name. They were brilliantly framing me. If the massive fraud was ever somehow discovered, I would take the absolute fall and go to federal prison, leaving them incredibly rich and completely innocent. I remained completely icy. I meticulously gathered every single forged document, every suspicious routing number, and every fake email, and I handed them securely over to Deputy Attorney General Carmen. She took one long look at the fraudulent routing numbers and the fake notary stamps, and the color completely drained from her face. This was not an isolated, desperate incident. My father and his slick attorney had been ruthlessly running this exact same financial scheme on elderly, vulnerable clients for over 20 years. That very afternoon, a massive, highly classified criminal investigation called Operation Nightfall was officially launched. I quietly became a federally protected witness. My family grew incredibly desperate. They knew a major probate hearing was scheduled for the end of the month, and they strongly suspected I was going to formally object to the fake will. They needed to utterly discredit me before I could ever step foot into a courtroom. Just 3 days before the major hearing, I was quietly cleaning out the last of my grandmother's personal belongings. She had specifically left me a beautifully carved antique clock. As I gently dusted the heavy wooden base, a secret mechanical panel suddenly slid open. Inside, safely hidden away from the greedy world, was a small, worn leather ledger and a digital flash drive. I quickly plugged the small drive into my secure computer. A video instantly began to play. It was Grandmother Beatrice, recorded just months before her tragic death. She stared directly into the camera lens, looking absolutely resolute and entirely unafraid. She meticulously detailed every single threat my father had violently made against her. She brilliantly exposed how my mother meticulously laundered the stolen, bloody money through her prestigious charity fund to make it look entirely legal. And then, she softly said the beautiful words that finally healed my broken, heavy heart. Valerie is the only one who refused to take what was not hers. The worn leather ledger contained 20 full years of my parents' massive criminal empire. It listed exact names, specific dates, stolen properties, and hidden offshore accounts. It was the ultimate inescapable snare. Sometimes, the most profound peace comes only after you completely allow the toxic people who ruthlessly hurt you to entirely destroy themselves. That brings us directly back to 2 o'clock in the morning, standing barefoot and freezing on my front lawn. My family had brilliantly arranged a fraudulent arrest warrant by falsely claiming I was actively destroying highly sensitive estate documents. They cleverly coordinated the midnight raid with a deeply corrupt local magistrate, deliberately ensuring Bryn could broadcast my ultimate humiliation to her 2 million rabid viewers. They deeply wanted a brutal public execution. I sat completely frozen in the dark back of the patrol car. 15 minutes later, the rough officers dragged me violently into the brightly lit Central Police Precinct. The crowded room was incredibly loud and chaotic until the Chief of Police, Chief Wallace, walked heavily through the swinging double doors. He held a thick, heavy stack of federal affidavits. He looked up. He saw my quiet face. He saw the cold steel cuffs locked tightly around my wrists. The heavy clipboard slipped instantly from his fingers and slammed violently against the hard tile floor. His rugged face went entirely pale. "My God," Chief Wallace whispered, his voice shaking. "Why is she here?" Every single tough officer in the busy precinct completely froze. The air in the room grew instantly, terrifyingly cold. "Get those cuffs off her. Now," he roared with absolute authority. He aggressively snatched the fraudulent warrant from the confused arresting officer, his dark eyes burning with absolute, uncontainable fury. Within seconds, the entire massive precinct was placed on total lockdown. Every single officer's personal phone was immediately confiscated. I was respectfully escorted into a private, highly secure federal briefing room. By 4:30 in the early morning, Deputy Attorney General Carmen was on a highly secure video link with a powerful federal judge. The fraudulent arrest warrant was immediately and aggressively quashed. The specific internet protocol address used to electronically send the fake evidence to the corrupt magistrate was traced directly back to the wireless router sitting in my parents' lavish living room. My family's brilliant, flawless trap had just snapped violently shut on their own arrogant necks. At exactly 9 o'clock that morning, the heavy wooden doors of the county courthouse swung forcefully open. The massive courtroom was packed entirely beyond capacity. My father, my mother, and Bryn sat proudly at the petitioner's table, dressed in ridiculously expensive designer clothes, looking incredibly smug and completely untouchable. They were eagerly waiting for the armed bailiff to lead me in wearing an orange jumpsuit and heavy iron chains. Instead, I confidently walked through the side doors wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit. The absolute, staggering shock on their faces was incredibly beautiful to witness. The smug, arrogant facades completely crumbled in real time. Attorney Harrison stood up rapidly, wildly stammering and heavily sweating, loudly demanding the stern judge completely strip me of my legal rights because I was a fleeing, dangerous felon. My brilliant legal counsel calmly stood up and simply handed the judge the powerful federal order quashing the illegal warrant. Then we dramatically called Chief Wallace to the witness stand. He testified clearly under oath that the midnight arrest was a fabricated, highly malicious attack deliberately designed to brutally intimidate a protected federal witness. The packed courtroom descended into absolute, deafening chaos. Then, my attorney quietly connected a secure laptop to the massive courtroom projector. We did not just play the damning financial records. We played the viral live stream. Bryn had been so utterly obsessed with her climbing viewer count that she completely forgot to mute her expensive microphone when the flashing police car finally drove away. My father's arrogant voice echoed loudly and clearly through the stunned, silent courtroom. "By breakfast, the trust is ours." Bryn's heavily contoured face drained of all human color. She started violently shaking her head, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly across her face. "You planned this," she hissed aggressively across the wide aisle, her voice violently cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. I looked at her with absolute icy precision. "No," I said incredibly calmly. "You planned my arrest. I just preserved the evidence." The strict judge was utterly enraged. She immediately and forcefully froze every single financial asset, permanently suspended Harrison's legal license on the exact spot, and ordered a massive, sweeping federal injunction against the entire sprawling estate. Outside the heavy courthouse doors, the real world had already brutally caught up. Bryn's massive corporate sponsors dropped her instantly in real time. Her massive, lucrative online empire completely crumbled into useless dust before she even physically reached her luxury leased vehicle. That late afternoon, heavily armed federal agents aggressively kicked down the heavy oak doors of my parents' massive estate and Bryn's expensive production studio. They ruthlessly seized digital servers, offshore routing documents, and hidden burner phones. They quickly uncovered a highly secret digital group chat named Brunch Club, where my entire toxic family had gleefully and meticulously planned my midnight arrest, actively coordinating down to the exact, flattering camera angles. The most absolutely staggering betrayal came directly from my mother. The seized financial ledgers definitively proved that Lorraine was not a passive, abused, ignorant wife. She was the absolute, brilliant mastermind who meticulously balanced the bloody books, expertly laundering millions of stolen, ruined dollars through her precious, highly respected charity. 2 days later, she desperately begged to see me in a cold, concrete federal holding room. When I sat quietly across the cold metal table, she immediately started crying her fake, fragile, manipulative tears. "I thought we were protecting the family," she loudly sobbed, desperately reaching her manicured hand out to grab mine. I pulled my hand sharply back, feeling completely and utterly cold. I silently slid a printed, highlighted transcript of her text messages directly across the metal table. It was a cruel message she sent while I was being forcefully loaded into the dark police car. It read, "Let her rot in a cold cell for a night. She will definitely sign." "No, Mother," I said, my steady voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "You were protecting what you stole." Her flawless mask finally, permanently slipped. She stared at me, completely shattered, finally realizing her weaponized tears held absolutely no power over me anymore. I calmly stood up and walked steadily out, leaving her entirely alone in the cold, empty room. The massive criminal trials took 14 exhausting months to completely resolve. My arrogant father, Warren, was heavily convicted of massive federal wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and severe elder abuse. He was strongly sentenced to 10 miserable years in a brutal federal penitentiary, and every single lavish asset he owned was completely seized by the government. The corrupt attorney Harrison received 8 hard years. Bryn entirely lost her massive platform, filed for massive, humiliating bankruptcy, and was strictly sentenced to 42 months in federal prison for severe witness tampering and heavy obstruction of justice. My mother, the grand, perfect Southern lady, was firmly sentenced to 2 full years in a strict federal facility. I am completely, entirely at peace. I successfully recovered my grandmother's beautiful historic home and proudly turned it into the Beatrice Trust Foundation, a totally free, powerful legal advocacy center that fiercely protects elderly citizens from ruthless financial predators. I have a deeply meaningful career I absolutely love, a beautiful, incredibly quiet life, and a profound, unshakable sense of self-worth that absolutely none of their dirty, stolen money could ever buy. Sometimes, the absolute most powerful revenge is simply letting the cold truth speak and walking away completely unbothered. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to walk away from highly toxic family members to fiercely protect your peace? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. If you truly enjoyed this video, please gently hit that like button, subscribe to the growing channel, and turn on notifications so you absolutely never miss a story. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next one.